Imagine standing on the Croisette at dusk, the air thick with the scent of salt and perfume, the pavement shimmering underfoot as if dusted with stardust. The Mediterranean breeze carries whispers of diamond-encrusted conversations, while photographers' flashes create a constellation of artificial stars against the deepening sky. But here's what strikes me as I watch this spectacle unfold year after year. We're not just witnessing a film festival or even a celebration of cinema. We're observing one of the last great theatres of luxury in our modern world, a place where the very concept of what it means to possess, to desire, and to display wealth gets performed on a global stage. And the question that haunts me, the one I want to explore with you tonight, is whether any of this actually means anything anymore, or if we're all just complicit in the most elaborate charade of our time. You see, when I think about Cannes and its relationship with luxury, I'm immediately confronted by this fundamental tension between spectacle and substance, between the surface glamour and whatever deeper philosophical currents might be flowing beneath. We live in an age where luxury has become democratized in some ways. You can buy a designer handbag on payment plans, experience 5-star service through apps, and curate an Instagram feed that rivals any celebrity's lifestyle. Yet simultaneously, true luxury, the kind that whispers rather than shouts, that creates rather than consumes, seems to be disappearing into a black hole of conspicuous consumption and performative wealth. Let me tell you what I see when I watch the Cannes ritual unfold each May. There's something almost religious about it, isn't there? The careful choreography, the reverent attention to detail, the way everyone involved treats each moment as if it carries some cosmic significance. But here's where it gets interesting, and where I think we need to dig deeper. Is this elaborate theatre of luxury at Cannes actually serving as a showcase for genuine craftsmanship, artistry, and cultural value? Or has it devolved into something more cynical, a philosophy of luxury that's been hollowed out and replaced with pure marketing spectacle? When I watch a star ascend those famous steps in a gown that costs more than most people's annual salary, I'm witnessing multiple layers of meaning collapse into a single moment. There's the immediate visual impact, of course, the way light plays across silk, the precision of a perfectly tailored silhouette, the choreographed elegance of movement. But beneath that surface, there's a complex web of economic relationships, cultural signaling, and perhaps most importantly, a kind of collective agreement about what constitutes value in our society. Think about the craftsmanship that goes into a haute couture gown worn for 30 minutes on a red carpet. We're talking about hundreds of hours of hand-sewing, pattern-making that's closer to engineering than fashion design. Materials sourced from the far corners of the earth and processed using techniques that have been refined over centuries. There's something almost medieval about it. The guild-like structure of the ateliers, the master-apprentice relationships, the jealously guarded secrets of technique and proportion. This isn't just clothing. It's a continuation of humanity's oldest relationship with beauty, craft, and the transformation of raw materials into objects of desire. But then I have to ask myself, and I want you to consider this too, what happens to that meaning when the gown becomes primarily a vehicle for brand placement, when the star wearing it may not even know the name of the seamstress who spent weeks perfecting the beadwork, when the entire moment exists mainly to be photographed, digitized, and fed into the endless content machine of contemporary media? Does the craftsmanship somehow transcend its commercial context, or does the context fundamentally alter the nature of what we're looking at? This brings me to something that fascinates me about the stars themselves. These individuals who have become our modern myths, our contemporary gods and goddesses walking among us for brief, carefully orchestrated moments. When I see someone like Kate Blanchett or Tilda Swinton navigate the canned red carpet, I'm not just seeing an actress promoting a film. I'm witnessing the performance of an archetype, the embodiment of certain cultural ideals about beauty, success, and what it means to live an extraordinary life. But here's where the mythology gets complicated, and where I think we need to examine what's really happening beneath the surface. These stars aren't just famous for their talents. They've become famous for their ability to embody and project certain fantasies about luxury living. They're human mood boards, walking advertisements for a lifestyle that most of us will never access, but all of us are encouraged to aspire toward. When a star posts about their skincare routine or their workout regimen or their meditation practice, they're not just sharing personal information. They're selling us a vision of self-optimization that's deeply intertwined with consumption. The tragedy, and I do think it's a tragedy, is that this mythologization process often obscures the actual human being underneath. I've had conversations with people who work in the film industry, and they'll tell you that some of the most compelling, intelligent, complex individuals they know are completely invisible to the public because they don't fit the narrow parameters of what we expect our modern myths to look like. Meanwhile, people who might be perfectly pleasant but fundamentally ordinary get elevated to godlike status because they photograph well and know how to navigate the machinery of celebrity. This is where the philosophy of luxury becomes really interesting to me, because what we're talking about isn't just objects or experiences. We're talking about an entire worldview, a way of understanding what makes life worth living and what separates the extraordinary from the mundane. Traditional luxury, the kind that emerged from aristocratic culture and was refined through centuries of European court life, was based on certain principles that feel almost alien to our contemporary moment. It was about discernment rather than display, about the cultivation of taste as a form of intelligence, about creating beauty that would endure rather than impress. I think about the way wealthy collectors used to approach art acquisition, not as an investment strategy or a form of social signaling, but as a kind of spiritual practice. They would spend years learning about a particular period or medium, developing relationships with artists and dealers, creating collections that reflected a deep personal aesthetic philosophy. The luxury wasn't just in owning beautiful things. It was in the cultivation of the sensibility that could recognize and appreciate beauty in the first place. Compare that to what I observe at contemporary luxury events like Cannes. So much of what gets labelled as luxury today is really just expensive mediocrity. Products and experiences that cost enormous amounts of money but reflect no particular vision, demonstrate no exceptional craft, and create no lasting value. It's luxury as arms race, where the point is simply to outspend and outdisplay rather than to create or discover anything genuinely meaningful. But I don't want to be entirely pessimistic here because I think there are still glimpses of something more authentic happening even within the Cannes spectacle. When I see a filmmaker like the Dardenne brothers or Céline Sciamma walk that red carpet, there's a different quality to their presence. They're not performing luxury. They're embodying a different set of values entirely, the luxury of creative integrity, of spending years perfecting a vision, of refusing to compromise artistic truth for commercial appeal. Their presence at Cannes reminds us that luxury, at its deepest level, might have nothing to do with material possession and everything to do with the quality of attention we bring to our work and our lives. This is where Cannes becomes most interesting to me as a cultural phenomenon, not as a celebration of cinema per se, but as a mirror of our collective desires, our shared fantasies about what constitutes a life worth living. Every year, millions of people around the world tune in to watch this elaborate performance of wealth, beauty, and cultural significance. But what are we really looking for when we consume these images? What need is being fulfilled when we spend time thinking about what strangers wore to a party we'll never attend? I think there's something deeper happening here than simple voyeurism or escapism. I think we're using these images and stories as a way to explore our own relationship with desire, with the question of what we actually want from life and whether those wants are authentic or manufactured. When someone posts about coveting a particular dress or piece of jewelry they saw at Cannes, they're not just expressing material desire, they're trying to articulate something about who they imagine they could become, what version of themselves they're yearning toward. But here's what troubles me about using Cannes as our mirror of desire. The reflection it provides is so distorted, so removed from the actual textures and satisfactions of daily life, that I wonder if it's helping us understand our desires or simply confusing us further. The luxury lifestyle portrayed at Cannes exists in a kind of eternal present. It's all surfaces and moments, with no acknowledgement of the mundane realities that make up the vast majority of even the most glamorous lives. It's luxury without context, without consequence, without the kind of friction that gives meaning to our choices and experiences. I find myself thinking about what alternative mirrors we might use, what different ways we might explore and understand our relationship with luxury and desire. What if, instead of looking at red carpet coverage, we spent time learning about traditional crafts that are in danger of disappearing? What if we cultivated our own aesthetic sensibilities through direct engagement with art, music, literature, rather than through the mediation of celebrity culture? What if we thought about luxury not as something to be consumed, but as something to be created? The luxury of deep conversation, of uninterrupted time in nature, of work that aligns with our values. These questions become even more pressing when I consider what's happening to traditional luxury industries in our current cultural moment. The companies that built their reputations on generations of craftsmanship and cultural authority are now struggling to maintain relevance in a marketplace that increasingly values speed, accessibility, and social media visibility over the slower satisfactions of quality and durability. Many of the skills that created the objects we associate with historical luxury, hand weaving, traditional tailoring, artisanal jewelry making, are literally dying out because there's not enough economic incentive to preserve them. Yet, at the same time, I see signs of a counter-movement, a growing hunger for authenticity and substance that might offer hope for a more meaningful relationship with luxury. I meet people who are choosing to buy fewer, better things, who are learning traditional skills as a form of meditation and resistance to throwaway culture, who are creating their own definitions of what constitutes a rich life. These people might never walk a red carpet, but they're engaging with fundamental questions about value, beauty, and meaning that feel more philosophically serious than anything I typically observe in the mainstream luxury space. This brings me back to the central question I posed at the beginning. Does luxury still have meaning, or have we collectively agreed to participate in an elaborate emptying out of the concept? I think the answer is both more complex and more hopeful than a simple yes or no. I think luxury as a category retains enormous potential meaning, but only if we're willing to reclaim it from the forces that have turned it into pure spectacle and marketing. Real luxury, the kind that actually enhances human life and creates lasting value, requires us to slow down, to pay attention, to develop our capacities for discernment and appreciation. It asks us to consider not just what we want, but why we want it, and whether obtaining it will actually bring us closer to the kind of people we hope to become. It invites us to think about the relationship between cost and value, between rarity and meaning, between having and being. When I watch the Cannes parade each year, I try to see it not as a celebration of luxury, but as a kind of diagnostic tool, a way of taking the temperature of our cultural moment and asking what it reveals about our collective state of mind. What I see, increasingly, is a kind of desperate performance of significance, people working very hard to convince themselves and others that what they're doing matters, that the objects they're wearing and the events they're attending and the lives they're leading add up to something meaningful. But meaning, real meaning, doesn't come from external validation or expensive accessories, or even from being photographed in beautiful clothes against stunning backdrops. It comes from the quality of attention we bring to our experiences, from the depth of our relationships with other people and with the work we've chosen to do in the world, from our willingness to engage with difficult questions about what kind of life is actually worth living. So when I think about Cannes and its relationship to contemporary luxury culture, I see it as both a symptom of what's gone wrong and a potential catalyst for thinking more clearly about what might go right. The spectacle itself might be hollow, but our response to it doesn't have to be. We can use it as an opportunity to examine our own desires, to question the stories we tell ourselves about what constitutes success and beauty and meaning. We can ask whether the luxury we're being sold actually serves us, or whether we might be better served by developing our own, more personal definitions of what makes life rich and satisfying. The stars who walk those red carpets will continue to embody our collective mythologies, and the luxury brands will continue to use those moments to sell us products and lifestyles. But we don't have to be passive consumers of those narratives. We can approach the entire spectacle with curiosity rather than envy, with critical thinking rather than automatic desire. We can use it as a starting point for deeper conversations about what we actually value and why. What fascinates me even more deeply is how the Cannes phenomenon has evolved over the decades, becoming increasingly detached from its original purpose, while simultaneously becoming more culturally influential. When the festival began in 1946, it was conceived as a response to the politicization of the Venice Film Festival, a space where cinema could be celebrated purely as art form rather than as propaganda tool. There was something almost naive about that original vision, the idea that you could create a neutral space for cultural appreciation, free from commercial and political pressures. Look at what it has become now, and you see the complete colonization of that artistic space by commercial interests. Every moment is sponsored, every outfit is strategically placed product, every conversation is potential content for the endless hunger of digital media. The films themselves, the ostensible reason for the gathering, often feel like afterthoughts in the broader spectacle of brand activation and celebrity management. We've created a situation where the packaging has become more important than the contents, where the ritual of appreciation has overshadowed the thing being appreciated. But this transformation tells us something crucial about how luxury functions in late capitalism. It's not enough anymore for luxury goods to simply exist as superior versions of everyday objects. They have to become part of narrative systems, storytelling mechanisms that help us construct and maintain our identities. When someone buys a luxury handbag, they're not just purchasing superior craftsmanship and materials, though sometimes they're not even getting that. They're buying into a mythology about themselves, a story about who they are and how they want to be perceived by the world. This is why the star system and luxury brands have become so intertwined. Stars don't just wear luxury goods. They embody the mythologies that make those goods desirable. When we see a particular actress carrying a specific handbag or wearing a certain watch, we're not just receiving product information. We're being invited into a fantasy about what our lives could be like if we made similar choices. The star becomes a kind of lifestyle avatar, demonstrating not just what success looks like, but what it feels like, smells like, moves like. I've been thinking a lot about what this does to our relationship with our own desires. When so much of what we're told to want is mediated through these carefully constructed performances of desirability, how do we separate authentic personal preference from manufactured longing? I watch people scroll through red carpet coverage, and I see them engaging in a kind of desire archaeology, trying to figure out what they actually like versus what they've been trained to admire. There's something particularly insidious about how contemporary luxury culture exploits our deepest human needs for beauty, meaning, and transcendence. We're creatures who have always created and appreciated beautiful objects, who have always used material culture as a way of expressing our values and aspirations. Luxury goods tap into these fundamental aspects of human nature, but they often do so in ways that ultimately leave us feeling emptier rather than more fulfilled. Consider the psychology of acquisition that drives so much luxury consumption. There's always a moment of anticipation before purchasing something expensive, a fantasy about how owning this object will change your life, elevate your status, bring you closer to some idealized version of yourself. But what actually happens after the purchase? How often does the reality live up to the fantasy? How quickly does the new acquisition become just another object in your environment, requiring the next purchase to recreate that feeling of transformation and possibility? This cycle reveals something profound about the difference between having and being, between possession and experience. The most meaningful luxuries in my own life have been experiential rather than material. The luxury of uninterrupted time to think and write. The luxury of conversations with people whose minds challenge and inspire me. The luxury of traveling slowly enough to actually absorb and understand new places. These experiences can't be photographed for Instagram in the same way that a designer dress can, but they create lasting changes in who I am and how I see the world. Yet even experiential luxury has been colonized by the same forces that have transformed material luxury. Social media has turned travel, dining, and cultural experiences into content opportunities, performance spaces where we demonstrate our sophisticated tastes and enviable lifestyles. The luxury hotel industry has become increasingly about creating Instagram-worthy moments rather than genuine hospitality and comfort. Restaurants design dishes as much for how they'll photograph as for how they'll taste. Even our most private experiences are being shaped by their potential as public performance. This brings me to what I see as one of the most troubling aspects of contemporary luxury culture, the way it has invaded and colonized our inner lives. It's not enough anymore to sell us objects. Luxury brands want to sell us identities, worldviews, entire ways of being in the world. They want us to become brand ambassadors for their vision of what constitutes a life well lived. I think about the rise of lifestyle brands that sell everything from clothing to home goods to skincare to meditation apps, all unified by a particular aesthetic and philosophy. These brands aren't just selling products, they're selling total lifestyle systems, complete with their own values, rituals, and social hierarchies. They create communities of consumers who identify with the brand's vision so completely that purchasing becomes a form of self-expression and belonging. This is seductive precisely because it offers something we're all hungry for, a sense of coherent identity in a fragmented world, a feeling of belonging to something larger than ourselves, a ready-made aesthetic and moral framework that can guide our choices and help us make sense of our place in the world. But what happens when our sense of self becomes so intertwined with consumption patterns? What happens when our identity becomes dependent on our ability to afford the markers of the lifestyle we've chosen to embody? I've watched people become genuinely distressed when they couldn't afford the latest release from a brand they'd built their identity around, as if their sense of self was under threat. I've seen others go into debt to maintain lifestyle performances that bore no relationship to their actual financial reality. This isn't just materialism. It's something much more complex and troubling, a kind of existential outsourcing where we allow corporations to define not just what we should want, but who we should be. The Cannes red carpet becomes a particularly concentrated example of this phenomenon because it's where lifestyle performance reaches its most extreme and visible form. Every choice, from the dress to the jewelry to the way someone poses for photographs, is scrutinized and interpreted as a statement about identity, values, and aspirations. The stars become walking mood boards, embodying particular visions of femininity, success, sophistication, and cultural authority. But what strikes me most powerfully is how this performance of luxury and sophistication often masks a profound spiritual emptiness. I've read interviews with celebrities who describe feeling profoundly lonely and disconnected, even while surrounded by the trappings of success and luxury. They talk about the pressure to maintain perfect images, the difficulty of forming authentic relationships when everyone wants something from you, the way that constant performance makes it difficult to know who you really are underneath all the roles you're playing. This isn't to say that all wealthy or famous people are miserable. That would be both simplistic and condescending. But it does suggest that luxury and celebrity, as they're currently constructed, don't automatically deliver the fulfillment and meaning they promise. In fact, they might actually make certain kinds of fulfillment more difficult to achieve by creating distance between the person and their authentic experiences, needs, and relationships. When I think about what luxury could be, what it might look like if we stripped away the performance and the social signaling and the manufactured desire, I imagine something much more intimate and personal. I imagine luxury as the cultivation of sensitivity, the development of our capacities for appreciation and discernment. I imagine it as the creation of conditions that allow our best selves to emerge and flourish. This kind of luxury doesn't require enormous financial resources, though it does require something that might be even more precious in our current cultural moment: time, attention, and the willingness to move slowly enough to actually experience our lives rather than just document them. It requires the courage to develop our own taste rather than simply adopting the preferences that have been marketed to us. It requires the discipline to distinguish between what we actually enjoy and what we think we're supposed to enjoy. I think about craftspeople I've met who have dedicated their lives to mastering traditional skills: bookbinders, weavers, furniture makers, ceramicists. There's a quality of presence and satisfaction in their work that feels like true luxury to me. They've created lives organized around the production of beautiful, useful objects. Their relationship with material culture is creative rather than purely consumptive. They understand their tools and materials intimately. Their work connects them to traditions that stretch back centuries while allowing them to express their individual vision and personality. This kind of relationship with making and having feels completely different from the luxury culture represented at Cannes. It's grounded in skill rather than spending, in creation rather than acquisition, in the slow development of expertise rather than the quick hit of purchasing power. It suggests a different model for what luxury might become if we were willing to reimagine it from the ground up. But I also recognize that not everyone can become a craftsperson, and that there are legitimate pleasures to be found in well-made objects created by others. The question is how we develop more conscious, intentional relationships with the things we choose to own and the experiences we choose to have. How do we cultivate discernment without becoming snobs? How do we appreciate beauty without falling into the trap of using our possessions as markers of identity and status? I think the answer lies partly in developing what I might call philosophical luxury, a way of approaching beautiful objects and experiences that's grounded in curiosity rather than acquisition, in appreciation rather than ownership. This might mean spending more time in museums and galleries, not to be seen in culturally sophisticated spaces, but to actually look at and think about what you're seeing. It might mean learning about the history and techniques behind objects you admire, developing a deeper understanding of what makes something well-made or beautiful. It definitely means cultivating the ability to experience pleasure and beauty, without immediately wanting to possess or replicate what you've experienced. Some of the most luxurious moments in my life have been ones where I encountered something beautiful, a sunset, a piece of music, a perfectly prepared meal, and was able to appreciate it fully without any desire to capture or own it. There's a particular kind of freedom in that kind of non-possessive appreciation, a luxury of being present that no amount of money can purchase. This philosophical approach to luxury also requires us to think more carefully about the relationship between scarcity and value. So much of contemporary luxury culture is based on artificial scarcity, limited editions, exclusive access, products and experiences that are expensive precisely because most people can't afford them. But true rarity, the kind that creates lasting value, usually has to do with quality rather than exclusivity. A piece of music that moves you to tears, a book that changes how you see the world, a conversation that shifts your perspective. These experiences are rare, not because they're expensive, but because they require a particular alignment of attention, skill, and circumstance. When I watch the Cannes spectacle now, I try to see it as an opportunity to practice this kind of philosophical luxury. Instead of focusing on the clothes or the jewelry or the obvious markers of wealth and status, I look for moments of genuine human connection, instances of authentic pleasure or appreciation, glimpses of the people underneath the performance. Sometimes I find them, a moment of unguarded laughter, a gesture of genuine kindness, an expression of real concentration as someone watches a film they care about. These moments remind me that even within the most commercialized and performative contexts, there's still space for authentic human experience. The challenge is learning to recognize and value those moments without being distracted by all the spectacle surrounding them. It's a skill that has applications far beyond red carpet watching. The ability to find meaning and beauty in situations that might seem superficial or corrupted, while still maintaining critical awareness of the systems and forces that shape those situations. In the end, I think luxury still has the potential to mean something profound, not as a marker of social status or economic power, but as a way of engaging with the world that prioritizes quality over quantity, depth over surface, meaning over mere sensation. The question isn't whether luxury has meaning, but whether we're brave enough to insist on that meaning in a culture that often seems determined to drain it away. That's the real philosophy we need to grapple with, not just during the Cannes Festival, but in every choice we make about how to spend our time, our attention, and our resources in this brief, extraordinary experience of being alive. The stars will continue to walk their red carpets. The brands will continue to stage their elaborate performances of desirability, and the machinery of contemporary luxury culture will continue to churn out new objects and experiences for our consumption. But we have the power to choose how we engage with all of this, whether we allow ourselves to be passive consumers of manufactured desire, or whether we use these cultural moments as opportunities to think more deeply about what we actually value and why. That choice, more than any purchase we might make, determines whether luxury will continue to have meaning in our lives and in our culture.